noise of the world behind. Night settled softly over Judea, laying a violet hush across the hills and valleys. The stone homes of Jerusalem breathed incense and lantern light, and beyond the city's walls, olive groves stood like dark sentinels in the warm desert wind. Somewhere along a lonely road, a shepherd paused to adjust his cloak. The wool smelled of sheep and sun. The earth smelled of dust and ancient prayers. The faint rustle of fig leaves, the coo of doves perched on the temple's outer wall, and the distant murmur of merchants closing their stalls at the marketplace mingled in the air. Everything seemed to prepare itself for something sacred. Even the stars above, small lanterns strewn across the heavens, felt closer, as if leaning in to listen. In this stillness, questions hung in the night like lanterns swaying in a gentle breeze. Have you ever yearned to be invited, to be seen, to be welcomed when life leaves you wandering on desert roads? Do you know the weight of being overlooked or the ache of waiting outside someone else's celebration? The people of Judea knew these feelings intimately. Their days were filled with toil, tending vineyards, drawing water from deep wells, hammering stone, baking bread in clay ovens, and their nights with prayers whispered into the dark. They walked dusty paths with burdens on their backs and inside their hearts, burdens of regret, of longing, of fear, of loneliness. Along the road leading from Jerusalem toward Jericho, oil lamps were being lit in quiet homes. A woman stirred a pot of lentils, humming a psalm as she worked. A father sat on a stone step, mending a sandal by the glow of a lamp. The desert wind carried the scent of baking bread, mingled with voices reciting evening prayers. Somewhere in the city, a trumpet sounded from the temple wall, calling the faithful to attention. This world, with its olive trees casting long shadows and its wells reflecting the stars, is our canvas. You are invited not merely to hear a parable, but to step into it, to feel the dust beneath your feet and the chill of a stone wall at your back, to taste the bread and wine prepared, and to know the depths of human longing that give this ancient story its power. As you settle into this story tonight, let the slow rhythm of its unfolding guide you into a place of deep rest and reflection. Let its symbols, lantern light, desert roads, open doors, open a space within your heart. For within these chapters lie echoes of a grand invitation and the gentle whisper of a king calling you home. In a grand stone palace perched above Jerusalem's winding streets, a king paced beside an open balcony, watching the last glow of sunset fade beyond the hills of Judea. The scent of cedar beams and drying figs filled the hall. Servants moved silently to and fro, carrying baskets of dates and freshly pressed olive oil. In the courtyard, carpenters worked by lamplight, crafting long tables and benches from olive wood. A feast was being prepared, a celebration unlike any the kingdom had seen. This feast was for the king's beloved son, a prince who embodied the hopes of a people yearning for renewal. The king's eyes glistened with pride and tenderness. He remembered the day his son was born, the anxious prayers in the temple courtyard, the midwives' whispered psalms. He remembered the boy's first steps between between sandstone pillars. The first time he climbed an olive tree and laughed at the open sky. Now, the time had come to honor the prince's coming of age with a wedding feast that would gather the kingdom under one roof. It would be more than a meal. It would be a symbol of unity, of promise, of joy. The king summoned his most trusted servants, men and women who had served him faithfully since his youth. They bowed deeply, their tunics brushing the smooth mosaic floor. "Go to those who have been invited," the king said gently, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Tell them the feast is ready. The oxen and fatted cattle have been prepared. Everything is in place. Tell them to come." The servants nodded and bowed again. But as they turned to depart, the king placed a hand on the shoulder of one young servant. Her name was Miriam, and though she had been raised among the palace's stone corridors, she knew the back alleys of Jerusalem as well as any poor woman on the street. "Miriam," the king said, his eyes softening, "you have a compassionate heart. Remember as you go that this invitation is not merely an order, it is a gift. Carry it with humility." Miriam felt the weight of the scrolls in her hands. Each invitation represented more than a seat at a table. It offered acceptance, honor, a place in the king's joy. She thought of the people who would receive them, elders with lined faces, merchants with calloused hands, scholars with ink-stained fingers. Would they see it as the treasure it was? Or would the busyness of their lives, the pressing concerns of fields and shops and family obligations, cause them to turn away? As she and the other servants stepped out into the evening air, Miriam paused to look back at the palace. Lanterns glimmered in every window. The smell of roasting lamb wafted through the courtyard. Somewhere within those walls, musicians were tuning their lyres and pipes. A soft chant rose from the temple across the valley, a psalm about the steadfast love of God enduring forever. Miriam clutched the invitations tighter. She whispered a prayer as she headed down the stone steps into the darkening city, lanterns swinging gently in her grasp. In the cool night, the streets of Jerusalem still hummed with life. Children laughed, chasing one another through narrow alleys. A blind man tapped his way along the wall, humming a song. The king's messengers, cloaked and determined, fanned out into the city and beyond, each carrying the same urgent message. The feast is ready. Come and share the joy. The first house Miriam approached belonged to a wealthy merchant named Ezra. His courtyard was filled with the smell of freshly pressed wine and baskets of exotic spices from Jericho. Lanterns hung from fig trees, casting dappled light on colorful rugs spread across the ground. Ezra himself stood in the center, counting coins with nimble fingers. His hair was oiled and neatly combed. A ring flashed on his hand. When Miriam called his name, he looked up, eyebrows lifting in surprise. "Miriam, what brings you here at this hour?" he asked, wiping his hands on a silk cloth. "I bring a message from the king," she replied, unfurling the scroll. Its edges were embossed with gold leaf. The royal seal gleamed in the lamplight. She read aloud, her voice reverent. "Ezra, son of Levi, you are invited to the wedding feast of my beloved son. The banquet is prepared, everything is ready. Come and rejoice with us." Ezra's face changed, but not with the delight Miriam expected. His eyes darted toward a line of jars stacked against the wall. "A feast?" he muttered, half to himself. "What an honor!" Truly, he shifted his weight, gaze falling to the ledger in his hands. "But you see, I have an important delivery to make to Caesarea. My ships are loaded with goods that must leave at dawn. If I delay even a day, I could lose everything." He gave a polite but distracted smile. "Perhaps the king will understand. Tell him I am grateful but cannot come." Miriam felt a pang. She knew Ezra had spent his life building his business, but she also knew the invitation was a once-in-a-lifetime honor. "The king's feast is unlike any other," she whispered. "He desired your presence." Ezra nodded vaguely, already turning back to his accounts. "Another time, perhaps," he said, tucking the invitation into a clay jar as though it were a receipt. The door closed softly behind Miriam, leaving her alone under the fig tree. Across the city, other servants faced similar responses. A farmer outside Jericho brushed dirt from his hands and shook his head. "My fields need plowing," he said, staring at the stars. "If I leave now, the weeds will overtake my wheat." A scholar in the temple courtyard smiled kindly but declined, gesturing toward a stack of papyrus scrolls. "I have a debate at the synagogue in the morning. The law cannot interpret itself." A young man adjusting new yokes on his oxen laughed nervously. "I have just bought these beasts. If they are weak, my livelihood is ruined. Forgive me, I cannot come." The excuses varied. Work, family, responsibilities, fear of losing what they had. But each shared a common thread. The concerns of daily life obscured the beauty of the invitation. Their hands were busy, their minds preoccupied. They did not see the open door, the light streaming through it, the banquet prepared for them. They could not imagine that joy might await beyond their planned obligations. As Miriam walked back through the streets, she felt heavy. She thought of the king's face, of his anticipation. How would he feel to hear that those he honored had turned away? She glanced up at the temple, where prayers drifted like incense. "Oh God," she whispered, "open our hearts." She tucked the remaining scrolls under her arm and continued on, lanterns swinging, a lone light moving through the city. Outside the city walls, along the road to the vineyards that crept down into the valleys, another group of servants approached a different house, one known for its lush fruit and generous harvests. The owner, Tobias, was a man of influence, his vineyards stretching across hillsides like a sea of green. In his courtyard, workers sharpened pruning hooks and filled wineskins. His wife sat with other women, sorting figs into baskets. When the servants announced the king's invitation, Tobias frowned. "A wedding feast?" he repeated, folding his arms. "Why would the king invite me? I have never been welcomed at his table. Besides, harvest season is upon us. The grapes will not wait. Tell the king we have fields to tend." Another servant, an older man with lines around his eyes, stepped forward. "The king invites you because his heart is generous," he said quietly. "He wants you to share in his joy. He calls you friend." Tobias's eyes narrowed. "If the king wanted me as a friend, he would have listened when I petitioned him about the taxes," he said bitterly. No, my answer is no. Now leave my land." As the servants turned to go, a group of farmhands blocking the gate snatched at them. "Traitors!" one of them spat. "We will not bow to this king." They pushed the servants back, throwing stones and cursing. One servant, trying to shield a younger colleague, took a blow to the head and fell to the ground. Blood trickled down his forehead. The hands of these vineyard workers, hardened by years of pruning vines and picking grapes, were now raised in violence. Word of the attack spread like dry brush catching fire. In other towns, some of the king's messengers faced similar hostility. There were those who resented the king's authority, who saw his invitation as a threat. They insulted the servants, beat them, even killed them, and left them on the side of the road. The people's hearts, once softened by songs of psalms and the rhythms of tradition, had become calloused by resentment, greed, and fear. Back at the palace, the king waited for his servants to return with stories of joyful acceptance. Instead, he saw wounded bodies carried through the gates and tear-streaked faces bent low. Miriam came forward, clothes torn, hair tangled, and fell at his feet. "Your Majesty," she whispered. "Many made excuses. Others attacked us. They mocked us. They refused to come." Her voice broke. The king's face contorted with grief and anger. Tears welled in his eyes. He thought of his son, of the feast being prepared, of the fatted cattle ready to be served. He thought of the wounded servant, of the blood on the messenger's brow. "They killed my servants," he whispered, voice trembling. His grief quickly became righteous indignation. "How have they turned away? How have they become so hardened?" He looked out at the hills, where the vineyards that had once been his pride now housed men who despised him. The king sent his guards, strong and swift, to confront the murderers and to render judgment. Fire was set to the vineyards that had harbored the rebels. Smoke rose into the sky like incense turned bitter. A great wail went up from the valleys. The same hands that refused the invitation now covered eyes against the flames. It was not out of vengeance alone that the king acted. There was sorrow intertwined with his anger. He wanted the feast to be filled with laughter and music, not fire and mourning. But the destruction of the vineyards was a necessary reckoning. The people had to see that contempt for the king's generosity had consequences. In the smoldering fields, amid the burnt vines, there remained the faintest scent of grapes, reminding all of a sweeter invitation that had been rejected. The palace kitchens continued to simmer. Lambs roasted in clay ovens, their aroma mingling with coriander and cumin. Honeyed figs and pomegranates glistened in clay bowls. Musicians tested their instruments, plucking slow, melodic strings that hung in the air like prayers. Though many invited guests had refused and some had rebelled violently, the king was determined that his son's feast would not be empty. He would fill his house with those who would appreciate his generosity. "Miriam," the king called, his voice softer now. She rose from where she had been tending to the wounded servant. He handed her a new set of scrolls. These were not embossed with gold, but written in plain ink. "Go into the streets, the alleys, the highways. Invite everyone you find," he said. "The poor, the maimed, still room at my table. Those who were originally invited were not worthy, for they despised grace. But my house shall be filled with joy." Miriam's eyes widened. In all her years, she had never seen a king open his gates so widely. "Even the beggars at the gate?" she asked quietly. "Even them," the king replied. "Especially them. Go quickly. There is still time." With renewed purpose, Miriam and the other servants left the palace. Lantern light danced on the palace walls as the gates swung open. The servants walked down alleys where cracked clay walls smelled of damp earth. They passed by wells where women drew water at odd hours, ashamed to face the scorn of others. They entered streets lined with beggars wrapped in threadbare cloaks, leaning on canes, eyes clouded by blindness. These people had always seen the king's palace from a distance, its marble columns glistening like ivory, but had never imagined setting foot inside. Miriam approached an old woman sitting by a well. Her back was hunched, her hands arthritic. Her name was Hannah, and for years she had hobbled to this well to draw water for others, earning a few coins, always watching other women chat and laugh while she remained on the margins. Miriam knelt so their eyes were level. "Hannah," she said, "the king invites you to his son's wedding feast. Will you come?" Hannah's mouth fell open. "Me?" she whispered, tears gathering. "I am no one. I cannot repay the king. I have nothing to wear." Miriam smiled gently. "You are precisely who he wants at his table. He has garments for you, robes of honor. Come." Miriam took Hannah's weathered hand, helping her stand. Hannah's eyes shone with disbelief and joy. Further down the road, a young man named Simon staggered with a makeshift crutch. A childhood accident had left his leg twisted. For years, he had sat outside the synagogue, listening to prayers he believed were not meant for him. Miriam approached him with the same invitation. "Me?" he cried, laughing and sobbing at once. "I cannot walk without pain." "We will carry you if we must," Miriam said, and two other servants came to lift him gently. The invitation spread like wind through fields of barley. A blind musician, feeling his way along the marketplace wall, was told of the feast. He tilted his head toward the palace as though he could see its lights. A woman with a scar across her face, hidden behind a shawl for years, pressed her hand to her chest when she heard the news. A little boy in rags tugged at Miriam's sleeve. "Can my mother come too?" he asked. Miriam nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Bring everyone." They came from every direction, shepherds carrying lambs on their shoulders, potters with clay under their fingernails, widows in dark veils, children with sandal straps undone. They came because someone saw them and spoke their names with honor. They came because the king's invitation was not about status, but about grace. And with each person who accepted, Miriam's lantern seemed to burn brighter, as if hope were fueling the oil within. The road to the palace wound through fields and hills, past vineyards still smoldering from the king's judgment, through olive groves whose leaves whispered in the breeze. Those who had accepted the invitation walked slowly, some leaning on staffs, others carried in carts. Their steps were hesitant yet hopeful. For many, it was the first time they had left their villages. For others, it was the first time they had ever been invited to anything beyond a temple courtyard. Simon, the lame young man, sat in a cart drawn by a donkey. His twisted leg ached from the journey, but his eyes shone with anticipation. Beside him sat Hannah, fingers fiddling with the frayed edges of her shawl. She kept looking back at her village, where she had spent her life hidden in the shadows of others. Her home receded like a shadow against the darkening horizon, and with each step away from it, she felt a burden lift. "We are going to a king's feast," Simon whispered, half in disbelief, half in awe. "A king's feast," Hannah repeated softly, letting the words roll over her tongue like the taste of honey. She had heard such feasts described in Psalms: the abundance, the joy, the songs. To imagine herself there felt like a dream. Ahead of them, a group of shepherds from the hills of Judea kept watch over their small flock even as they walked. They were used to watching stars, to listening to the wind rustle through grass. Now they watched the palace grow nearer, the lamps in its windows like stars fallen to earth. Behind them, a blind musician walked with his hand resting on Miriam's shoulder. Every now and then he would stop and turn his face toward the sky. "It sounds different here," he would whisper. "There is music in the air already." As the caravan drew closer to Jerusalem, the road widened and more people joined them. A widow named Salome whispered prayers under her breath, reciting psalms about God lifting the humble and filling the hungry with good things. A former tax collector kept his head low, still ashamed of the lives he had hurt, yet drawn by the promise of mercy. A Samaritan woman, used to being shunned, walked at the edge of the group, uncertain if she truly belonged. Miriam noticed her and fell into step beside her, offering a gentle smile. "You are welcome," she said simply. The woman nodded, tears sparkling in her eyes. The desert wind carried the scent of burning wood from the earlier destruction, mingled with the fresh smell of dew settling on the fields. The travelers passed wells and fig trees where villagers paused to stare at the procession. Some whispered in disbelief that such people, cripples, blind, poor, were invited to the palace. Others felt a stirring in their own hearts, a longing mixed with pride and fear. What would it be like to admit one's need and accept such an invitation? The road itself became a symbol of transformation, leaving behind old identities and fears, walking toward something unknown yet promised. Lanterns flickered like stars along the path, casting warm circles of light in the darkness. With each step, the travelers shed layers of shame, of self-sufficiency, of isolation. They began to talk to one another, sharing stories of lost loves, of crops that failed, of prayers answered and unanswered. They discovered that though their wounds differed, their hearts beat with the same longing for acceptance, for purpose, for hope. As the palace gates came into view, illuminated by torches that burned through the night, the travelers gasped. The marble columns glowed a soft gold under the starlight. Music drifted through the open windows, mingling with the night wind. Miriam lifted her lantern high. "You are almost home," she whispered, more to herself than to the crowd. A feeling of reverent excitement settled desert road had led them to a place they never imagined they could enter, and the open doors shone like a promise that their journey, both outer and inner, was not in vain. At the entrance to the palace, servants stood with basins of water and linens. Each guest, dusty from the journey, approached hesitantly, but the servants' faces were warm. They knelt to remove sandals caked with dust and to wash feet calloused by years of walking on rough terrain. The water was cool and refreshing. Hands that had trembled with anxiety now were cared for, washed clean as if the day's burdens were being lifted away with the grime. After washing, the guests were given garments, soft robes of linen and wool dyed with rich colors. Hannah ran her fingers along the sleeve, feeling the fine weave. She had never worn anything so beautiful. She had never been dressed by someone else. Tears streamed down her cheeks as a servant tied a sash around her waist. She felt more than clothed. She felt dignified. Simon stood near a pillar, holding his crutch. A servant approached with a robe. Simon looked down at his worn tunic. "I do not deserve this," he whispered, but the servant smiled. "It is a gift," he said simply. Simon allowed the servant to drape the robe over his shoulders. As the fabric fell, covering his crooked leg, he felt warmth spread through his body. He looked toward the palace doors, lit like dawn. He took a deep breath and lifted his chin. One by one, the guests entered the great hall. The room was vast, its ceiling supported by carved cedar beams. Mosaics of vineyards, rivers, and flocks covered the walls. Oil lamps hung from chains, casting a gentle glow over the feast laid out on long tables. Platters overflowed with roasted lamb, breads flavored with herbs, bowls of olives and figs, clusters of grapes, cheeses dripping with honey. Clay jugs filled with wine lined the tables. Musicians sat to the side, playing soft melodies that warmed the heart. There was laughter, the sound of Hannah's deep chuckle as she tasted dates so sweet they brought tears, the sound of a child from the alley clapping his hands to the rhythm of a tambourine. There were whispers of disbelief. Can this be real? There were sighs of relief as those who had always sat at the edge of life found seats reserved for them near the head of the table. The king, robed in white and gold, walked among them, his face radiant. He placed his hand on each shoulder, looking each guest in the eye as if they alone were the reason for the feast. Some of those originally invited did eventually arrive, drawn by curiosity or guilt. They slipped through the door quietly, hoping to avoid notice. The king welcomed them too, embracing them with the same warmth he showed the poor. All who came were greeted as sons and daughters. Yet amidst the joy, there was one who took a seat without accepting the garment offered at the door. He wore a tunic stained and torn, refusing the robe of honor. He smiled and laughed, drank deeply from the wine, and even joked with those around him. But his eyes darted around, never resting. He refused to let go of his old identity, his own plan for how he would be perceived. The robe he refused to wear remained folded near the entrance, a symbol of humility untouched. The feast continued long into the night. The guests sang psalms, voices rising and falling like waves. Children fell asleep rescued from rocky ledges. Women shared memories of husbands lost in wars and of prayers whispered over sick children. The king listened, sometimes laughing, sometimes weeping, always attentive. His son sat at the head of the table, his eyes gentle, his words few. He watched as those most forgotten in society were given the highest honor, and his heart overflowed. As the king moved through the room, speaking blessings over those assembled, his gaze fell upon the man without the wedding garment. The man sat near a pillar, head thrown back in laughter, a goblet of wine in his hand. His clothes, though once fine, were now frayed and stained. He wore them as a badge of independence, a refusal to conform. He noticed the king's approach but kept his eyes fixed on his drink, as if ignoring the royal presence would render it powerless. "Friend," the king said, stopping beside him, "how did you come in here without a wedding garment?" His tone was not accusatory but curious, as one might speak to a child who had strayed. The man's smile faltered. His fingers tightened around the goblet. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Those near him fell silent. The soft music hummed underneath the sudden tension. The man looked down at his stained tunic, then at the unclaimed robe folded by the door. He had walked past it knowingly, perhaps thinking he did not need anyone's charity, perhaps believing he could bring himself into the feast on his own terms. He shrugged, trying to feign indifference. The king's eyes searched his, and in that gaze the man saw himself truly, saw his pride, his fear of being seen as weak, his belief that his worth came from his possessions, his reputation. Shame flooded him, and for a moment, humility flickered. He could still reach for the garment, but his hands did not move. The king sighed softly, a weight of sorrow pressing into his shoulders. "Bind him hand and foot," he said quietly to his guards, "and cast him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." His words hung in the air, heavy and final. The musician's fingers stilled. The laughter ceased. Two guards stepped forward, their faces lined with regret. They gently but firmly took the man by the arms. He did not resist. His arrogance had evaporated. As he was led away, his eyes finally met the king's, and within them he saw infinite compassion mixed with unyielding truth. The door closed behind him, and the sound of the feast resumed, though it was softer now, tinged with solemn awareness. A hush swept over the tables as guests processed what had happened. For some, fear fluttered in their chests. For others, a deeper gratitude filled them, along with a humility that they might have once scorned. The robe of honor was not optional for those who wished to remain. It symbolized more than cloth. It was a surrender, a willingness to let go of one's own way of earning favor and to accept the gift of grace. Hannah clutched the sleeve of her garment and whispered a prayer of thanks. Simon ran his fingers along the sash around his waist, feeling its texture, its weight. He remembered the moment he had accepted the robe without argument, and gratitude welled inside him. He thought of the man cast out and knew that had he insisted on coming on his own terms, he might have been him. The feast continued with renewed reverence. Each song sounded like a prayer. Each bite feast was not just about eating. It was about transformation. It required humility to receive, and it rewarded those who came open-hearted. The warmth of the lamps, the aroma of spices, the taste of wine, all became reminders of a deeper reality, that the king's invitation, though open to all, must be embraced with both hands, not clutched at with one while holding on to old garments with the other. At the head of the table, the king's son watched the events with a heart that felt both joy and sorrow. He was the honored one, and yet his focus was on those who filled the room. His eyes rested on Hannah as she laughed with the blind musician, on Simon as he shared a story with a shepherd, on the Samaritan woman now smiling shyly at the tax collector. He saw the old boundaries melting. He saw the labels of poor, broken, outcast dissolve under the glow of lantern light. He remembered his own childhood, walking among these same people in the marketplace, seeing their pain but often unable to do anything but pray. He remembered hearing his father's voice reciting psalms that promised a day when valleys would be lifted and mountains would be made low. Now, in this hall, he saw a small glimpse of that promise. The feast was like a window into a kingdom where all who were hungry could be filled, where those who were thirsty could drink wine freely, where shame was washed away and replaced with honor. The son stood and raised his cup. Conversations quieted. His presence commanded attention not through force but through gentleness. "Friends," he began, his voice deep yet tender, "our hearts overflow with gratitude that you have come. This feast is not just for me, it is for all of us. It reminds us that we do not live by bread alone, but by every word of grace that comes from God's heart." He looked toward those who had been invited first, but refused. Some had come, though late. Others were absent. He thought of those who beat the servants and killed them. He grieved for their hardness of heart, but did not let bitterness take root. He looked at the man thrown out for not wearing the garment. His expression was solemn. May his story remind us that we must come as we are, yes, but we must also allow ourselves to be changed, he said softly. Pride keeps us away. Humility opens the door. He raised his cup higher. Let this wine, the fruit of the vines of our land, remind us of the blood of prophets who have been spilled. Let the bread remind us of the manna in the wilderness, the mercy that sustained our ancestors. Let the oil remind us of the Spirit that heals and anoints. May this feast be a foretaste of the kingdom to come, where God will wipe away every tear. A murmur of assent rippled through the hall. The son took a sip, then sat. Music resumed. A new melody, slow and haunting, like a prayer sung under stars. It told of a people wandering in desert places, of a king who came to find them, of a feast prepared and an invitation given. As the song wound its way through the hall, faces softened, eyes glistened. Even those who had initially come out of curiosity or obligation felt something shift inside them. Hannah reached for Simon's hand. "I feel as if I have been seen for the first time," she whispered. Simon nodded, tears welling. The blind musician, listening to the son's words, felt a warmth in his chest that made him believe he could see see light even without eyes. The Samaritan woman, long excluded from Jewish feasts, looked around and saw that walls of hostility had not only been lowered, but torn down. The king watched his son with pride. He knew that the feast, though grand, was only a shadow of a greater union that lay ahead. Tonight, hearts were being opened, lives were being changed. The son's presence, his humility and wisdom, made this feast not just a celebration, but a sacred encounter. It turned the hall into a temple, the meal into a sacrament. In the warmth of those lanterns and the glow of that love, the line between heaven and earth blurred. As the night wore on, stories were shared between mouthfuls of bread and sips of wine. The shepherds spoke of nights spent under the stars near Bethlehem, where they had once heard the rustle of angel wings. The blind musician told of songs he played in the darkness, believing music to be a form of vision. Hannah recounted the time she nearly died of fever, and a neighbor girl sat by her side, singing psalms until the fever broke. Simon listened and, for the first time in years, spoke of the accident that twisted his leg. He had been climbing a fig tree with his brothers to gather fruit for their mother. A branch snapped. He fell, and in a moment, his life changed. He felt shame for years, believing he had been punished. Now, his story felt different. The pain remained, but it was woven with threads of grace, culminating in the journey that brought him to the king's table. His eyes met those of the son across the hall, and he felt seen. The Samaritan woman shared a story of a well at midday, of a stranger who asked her for water when all others avoided her. His words had changed her life. Sitting in this Jewish king's palace, she realized that invitation and acceptance transcended tribal lines. She clutched her robe tightly, grateful for this second chance. Other guests remembered the words of prophets about feasts. Isaiah had spoken of a mountain where a banquet would be spread for all peoples, where death's shroud would be lifted. David had written of a table prepared in the presence of enemies, of cups overflowing. Those ancient words whispered to them through the melody of the music. The feast before them felt like the first fulfillment of those prophecies. Even the king's servants shared stories. Miriam told of her childhood in a fishing village on the Sea of Galilee, of her father mending nets in the evening light, of feeling overlooked among her many brothers. She spoke of how the king had noticed her kindness and brought her to the palace. She told of the fear she felt when the first invitations were rejected, and the joy she experienced when the poor accepted. Her voice quivered. I have learned that our worth does not come from what we own, or even how well we obey rules, she said, glancing at the man who had been cast out. It comes from the grace of being invited and the humility of accepting. Across the hall, a scholar sat quietly, listening. He had initially scoffed at the idea of the feast, believing his knowledge of the law exempted him from such simple displays of generosity. Now, hearing these stories, he felt his heart soften. He thought of the words from the scroll of Proverbs. Do not exalt yourself in the king's presence, and do not claim a place among great men. He realized that the law he so meticulously studied was pointing him to this very moment, where love fulfilled what rules could not. Outside, the night deepened. The moon climbed higher. Desert wind rustled through the date palms in the courtyard. The palace glowed like a beacon. Inside, the stories woven together created a tapestry of grace, threads of sorrow and joy, of failure and redemption, of exile and homecoming. Each story, different though it was, echoed a truth that life is a journey of invitations, some accepted, some rejected, and that the most important invitation is not to a place, but to a relationship with the one who calls us by name. Not everyone at the feast felt ease. Among the newly seated guests was a man named Judah, a leather worker from Jericho. He had originally been on the list of the first invitees, but he had ignored the invitation. He had prioritized a lucrative order for a Roman garrison instead, telling himself he could not risk offending his most profitable customers. Yet as he hammered armor straps late into the night, the thought of the feast gnawed at him. What if the king noticed his absence? What if he had forfeited something irreplaceable? Driven by a restless heart, Judah had left his workshop and hurried toward the palace. By the time he arrived, the feast was well underway. He slipped inside quietly, hoping to blend in. He accepted the garment offered, but his eyes darted around nervously. He sat near the end of a table and kept his head down, ashamed of his earlier decision. As the night progressed, he felt both relief and regret. Relief that he was allowed in, regret that he had made excuses initially. He watched as Hannah and Simon laughed. He listened to stories of the poor being honored. He saw the king's son raise his cup in blessing. Judah's heart softened. Tears filled his eyes. He thought of the times he had neglected his family to fill orders on time, of the lies he had told to avoid paying fair wages. He felt the weight of his greed. He put his bread down and pressed his palms together. Silently, he whispered, "Forgive me." Across the table, the scholar who had studied the law noticed Judah's tears. He leaned over. "You came," he whispered. Judah nodded. "At the last minute, I almost missed this." The scholar smiled. "It is not too late," he said, quoting a psalm. "A broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise." Judah's shoulders shook with sobs, but they were healing tears. He felt the shame of his selfishness and the freedom of being forgiven. On the other side of the hall, a woman who had been invited from the highway watched this exchange. She had never known men to be gentle. Her life had been filled with exploitation. Seeing Judah weep and the scholar comfort him, seeing the king embrace those who had once been strangers, began to thaw the ice around her own heart. For the first time, she believed that vulnerability was not weakness, but strength. Even the memory of those who had refused the invitation lingered like a shadow at the edges of the celebration. Some of those people, working late in their fields, looked toward Jerusalem and saw the glow of the palace lights. They heard the faint echo of music carried by the wind. Part of them longed to be there. Part of them felt bound by pride to stay away. They told themselves that their fields were more important, that feasts came and went, that their daily toil was enough. what might have been tugged at their hearts. In the darkness, they felt the weight of regret. They would dream that night of open doors closing. Inside, the feast continued. Judah's regret turned to gratitude. He began to talk to the man beside him, sharing details of his craft. "I make sandals," he said, holding up his hands, calloused from years of shaping leather. "I have always prided myself on my skill, but tonight I realized that my talent would mean nothing if I missed this." The man beside him nodded. "I mend nets," he replied. "I too was late, but we are here now. Let us not squander this gift." Judah nodded. He took a bite of bread, savoring it as if it were the first bread he had ever tasted. The crust was crisp, the inside soft. He lifted his cup, noticing the reflection of the oil lamps in the surface of the wine. He felt time slow, each moment taking on weight. Regret melted into appreciation. He joined in a song, his voice trembling but sincere. In the singing, he felt his soul knit to those around him, and for the first time in years, his heart was at peace. Laughter began to bubble up from every corner of the hall, rising like the gentle lilt of a brook tumbling over stones. A group of children started a simple dance, clapping their hands and stamping their feet in rhythm. Their mothers watched, clapping along, tears of joy in their eyes. A shepherd began to play his pipe, weaving a melody that brought smiles to faces lined with age and hardship. Hannah found herself standing, holding Simon's arm for balance. Together they joined the dance. Hannah's feet, unaccustomed to such movement, stumbled at first. Simon, too, swayed precariously on his good leg. But soon they were laughing so hard that the awkwardness did not matter. A servant clapped along, then joined them, guiding their steps. The music grew louder, not boisterous but joyful, like a release of years of oppression and loneliness. The blind musician began to sing. His voice was smooth and rich, carrying notes like gentle waves. He sang of God's steadfast love, of rivers in the desert, of tables prepared for weary souls. The hall fell quiet as his song hung in the air. Tears streamed down cheeks and hands pressed to hearts. The king closed his eyes, swaying slightly, letting the song wash over him. His son sat still, his eyes glistening. When the song ended, the hall erupted in applause. The musician bowed his head, humility etched across his face. He could not see the faces of those he moved, but he felt the warmth of their appreciation, like sunlight on skin. For a moment, he forgot his blindness. He felt seen in the way that mattered most. The Samaritan woman and the tax collector engaged in a conversation about mercy. "When I was at the well, I met a man who told me everything I ever did," she said softly, her hands cupped around a fig. "He did not condemn me. He offered me living water. Tonight feels like that water, a taste of eternal life." The tax collector nodded, eyes filled with understanding. "I have cheated many," he confessed. "I lived thinking there was no forgiveness for me. But the king's invitation, it shatters that lie. I feel like a new man. Toward the back of the hall, Miriam sat for a moment, leaning against a pillar. Fatigue pressed into her bones. She had walked miles, carried heavy emotions, washed feet, dressed bodies. Now she watched as though she had invited, laughed, and wept and danced. Her heart swelled with gratitude. She had never seen such a sight. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you," to the one who saw her when she was a girl by the sea, who called her to service, who gave her the courage to keep inviting. She felt warmth envelop her, as if someone were wrapping a cloak around her shoulders. The king's guards, who had earlier cast out the man without the garment, watched the celebration too. They had seen the darker side of the people, the rebellion, the violence. Now they saw transformation. One guard leaned to the other and said, "It is better to see a man dance than to bind his hands." The other nodded. They smiled, a rare and beautiful sight. Night deepened outside. The stars were bright, each twinkling like a blessing. A cool breeze wove through the open windows, fluttering the curtains. Lamps flickered, casting shadows on mosaic floors. Joy flowed through the hall, not in raucous waves, but in gentle ripples, bathing each heart in warmth. Joy that came not from wealth or success, but from being known and loved. Joy that spilled over like wine overflowing a cup, drenching those who had once been dry. Joy that whispered, "You are home, you belong." In a quiet moment, when laughter had momentarily softened and the musicians rested their hands, the king withdrew to a balcony overlooking the courtyard. The night air was cool. He leaned on the carved stone balustrade and gazed at the stars. The sounds of the feast drifted toward him. Soft singing, murmured conversations, clinking cups. Lantern light flickered across his weathered face, revealing lines carved by years of leadership, loss, and hope. His thoughts wandered to the days leading up to the feast. He remembered writing the invitations with care, imagining the joy on the faces of those who would receive them. He remembered the sting of rejection, the sight of his servants beaten, the fields ablaze. He remembered the decision to open his doors to the highways, to the poor. He thought of the man without the garment, his defiance, his silence, his removal. Each moment sat like a stone in his heart, heavy with meaning. He sighed. "Have I done enough?" he whispered into the night. "Have I been just? Have I been merciful?" He thought of his son, of how the young man's eyes had filled with compassion as he looked on the guests. He thought of his own failings as a king and as a man, of the times his anger had flared wrongly, of the times his pride had kept him from seeing his people's needs. Yet in the depth of his reflection, he felt a warmth stir within. He remembered the prophecy, a day when God would wipe away tears, when swords would be beaten into plowshares. He remembered the prayers his mother had whispered over him when he was a boy. He remembered the psalms he had written on nights like this, asking God to search his heart. He realized that his feast, though imperfect, was an act of faithfulness, a small reflection of a divine banquet that would one day welcome all who were willing to accept grace. He turned to look back into the hall. He saw Hannah laughing, Simon dancing, Judah wiping his eyes, the blind musician listening to voices he could not see. He saw his son leaning over to speak to a child, a smile gentle on his lips. The scene filled the king with hope. The feast was a glimpse, a foretaste. It did not erase the sorrows of life, but it pointed beyond them. He whispered a prayer. "Thank you for allowing me to witness this. Forgive me where I have failed. Help me lead with both justice and mercy." He breathed deeply. The air smelled of olive oil and smoke from extinguished torches. He exhaled slowly, letting tension leave his body. When he returned to the hall, his steps were lighter. Re-entering, he raised his arms. "Friends," he called, "my heart is full. Thank you for accepting my invitation. My son and I will never forget this night." Murmurs of gratitude answered him. He looked toward Miriam. "And thank you, my servants, for your faithfulness. Without you, none of this would have happened." Miriam bowed her head, humility radiating from her. The king's eyes scanned the hall once more. They landed on a corner where a small group sat quietly, not eating but praying. He recognized them as some of his youngest servants. He remembered that while others feasted, some chose to intercede, to offer thanks, to hold the moment before God. It warmed him. This feast was both a meal and a prayer, both a celebration and a symbol. As he resumed his seat, the music began again, slow and reflective. The feast continued, but the king's heart rested. He knew the night would end, but its lessons would not. He would carry them into his rule. The reminder that those who appear unworthy might be the most grateful, that generosity heals, that humility is the way into true joy, and that open doors can change lives. Later, when the lamps dimmed and bellies were full, some of the guests wandered into the courtyard for fresh air. The marble floor was cool beneath their feet. The night sky was brilliant with stars, the moon casting silver light on olive trees swaying gently. Crickets chirped. A fountain murmured quietly in the center, water spilling over its stone edges, shimmering like liquid glass. Hannah sat on a low wall and looked up at the sky. "I feel as if I could stay here forever," she whispered. Simon, sitting beside her, nodded. "Me too," he said. He reached down and splashed his fingers in the fountain. The water was cold, refreshing. He cupped it in his palms and brought it to his lips, tasting its purity. "Everything tastes better here," he observed with a smile. Others rested in the shade of fig trees, heads leaning back, eyes closed. A shepherd lay on his back, hands behind his head, listening to the whisper of wind through leaves. The blind musician sat cross-legged near the fountain, fingers gently tapping a rhythm on his knee. Though he could not see the stars, he felt them. He had never felt such peace. Miriam wandered among them, offering blankets. She stopped beside a group of young children curled up on a rug. One little girl peered up at her. "Will we have to leave?" she asked. Miriam knelt. "Not yet," she whispered. "Rest now." The king's feast is not over. As sleep began to claim the guests, dreams danced on the edge of consciousness. Hannah dreamed of being young again, running through vineyards at dawn, but in the dream, she was not alone. Someone ran presence she could not see but felt deeply. Simon dreamed of walking without pain, of climbing mountains without crutches, of leaping over streams like a deer. Judah dreamed of returning to his workshop with a light heart, of making sandals, not for profit, but for the joy of serving others. The Samaritan woman dreamed of wells of living water that never ran dry. Miriam sat on the edge of the fountain, dipping her hand into the cool water. She felt exhaustion mixed with a deep sense of fulfillment. She closed her eyes, and in her mind, she saw the road leading out of Jerusalem lined with lanterns. She saw more people walking toward the palace, people she had not yet invited but would in the days to come. She smiled. The invitation was not a single event, but a continual flow, like the water in the fountain, like the streams that cut through the desert. A cool breeze swept through the courtyard, rustling the branches of the olive trees. The fragrance of night-blooming jasmine filled the air. The stars above shimmered with ancient light. It felt as if heaven and earth were holding hands. Those who had always felt far from God now sensed his nearness in the whisper of the wind, in the warmth of the blankets, in the taste of water. Even in their dreams, they felt a presence that said, "You are loved." Morning light began to blush along the horizon, softening the edges of the night. The last of the stars faded, and birds began to stir in the fig trees. Inside the palace, the feast had ended. Empty platters were cleared away, jugs drained, tables wiped down. Guests began to gather their things. The robes they had been given still hung around their shoulders. Many would take them home, a token of the king's generosity and a reminder of their new status. Hannah took Simon's arm as they stepped through the palace doors. Her steps were slow, savoring each moment. "It feels strange to leave," she murmured, "as if I am leaving part of myself here." Simon nodded. "Maybe we are," he said, "or maybe we are carrying part of this place with us." At the gate, the king stood to bid farewell. His eyes were tired but joyful. He embraced each guest, whispering blessings. "Go in peace," he said to Hannah, touching her head gently. "Remember, you have a home here always." He took Simon's hand, gripping it firmly. "Walk in grace," he said. "Your journey does not end at my gate." The king's son stood beside him, placing his hand on each shoulder, smiling warmly. His presence felt like sunlight, gentle and steady. The guests walked slowly down the road they had traveled the evening before. The lanterns that had lined the path were now extinguished, the road bathed in dawn's soft light. Though the journey outward had been filled with questions and uncertainty, the journey back felt different. Their hearts were full. Their minds were quiet. Their steps were lighter. The desert wind felt cool against their faces. Along the way, they stopped at wells to drink. They passed fields where farmers already tended their crops. They greeted strangers with new warmth, carrying the joy of the feast into every interaction. Hannah's hunched shoulders seemed straighter. Simon's limp remained, but he did not see it as a curse anymore. It was part of his journey, part of what led him to the feast. When they reached their villages, neighbors came out to meet them. "Where have you been?" someone asked Hannah. She smiled, eyes shining. reclining. "At a feast," she replied simply. People looked at her robe, at her glowing face, at the softness in her voice, and knew something had changed. Simon's family ran to him, embracing him. They noticed the robe, the calm in his eyes. "Tell us everything," they begged. He laughed and promised he would. Around them, life continued. Children ran, goats bleated, vendors shouted prices. Yet for those who had attended the feast, everything felt infused with new meaning. Judah returned to his workshop and took out a pair of sandals he had been crafting. He looked at the worn leather and smiled. Instead of thinking of profits, he thought of the feet that would wear them, of the paths those feet might take, of the invitations that might be accepted because someone was willing to walk the road. He prayed over the sandals before stitching them closed. The Samaritan woman returned to her village and went straight to the well. This time, when she drew water, she smiled at the other women. She spoke of the feast not as an outsider, but as one who belonged. She shared bread with those who had none. She invited them to walk with her the next time the king opened his doors. Miriam returned to the palace, but her work was not over. The king called her aside and placed more scrolls in her hands. "There are still many who have not heard," he said. "Go again. Keep inviting. There will always be room." Miriam nodded, feeling her heart swell. She thought of the road, the lanterns, the faces yet to be seen. She felt both tired and exhilarated. "Yes, my lord," she whispered, clutching the invitations. As the morning sun climbed higher, its light warmed the stone walls of Jerusalem and glinted off the olive leaves. The parable of the wedding feast did not end with the last bite of food. It continued in the lives of those who had attended, in the invitations yet to be delivered, in the hearts transformed by grace. Lanterns would be lit again, doors would be opened, roads would be walked, and somewhere a king would wait, always ready to welcome all who would come. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of the feast lingered like the scent of spices in a well-seasoned bowl. Hannah, when gathering water, would smile at her reflection rippling in the well and remember the laughter of the king's hall. Simon, while carving wood for his crutch, would recall the feeling of the silk robe on his shoulders and the way his heart had danced. Judah, while cutting leather, would hum the songs sung by the blind musician. Every Sabbath, when prayers were recited and psalms were sung, they felt their hearts pulled back to the feast. The words of the prophets about banquets and mountains became personal, not distant promises. They now knew what it meant to be called in from the highways and hedges. They understood the humility required to accept an invitation they did not deserve. They felt the weight of the king's sorrow when guests refused, and the joy when guests accepted. In quiet moments, each of them contemplated the man cast out for not wearing the garment. They wondered what had become of him. Had he wandered the dark lanes outside the palace, weeping and gnashing his teeth? Had he realized his mistake and turned his heart toward humility? They prayed for him, not in judgment but in empathy, knowing that pride lurked in every heart. They prayed for those who had refused the invitation, for the vineyard owner who had turned violent, for the merchants who had chosen business over celebration. Their prayers felt different now, softer, less self-righteous, more tender. They began to see their own daily invitations differently too. When a neighbor asked for help carrying water, it felt like an invitation to grace. When a stranger passed through town, it felt like a chance to extend the hospitality they had received. When they saw someone sitting alone in the synagogue, they moved closer. When someone told them of a feast to come, a wedding, a circumcision celebration, a harvest meal, Hannah and Simon and Judah were among the first to arrive, carrying baskets of bread and jars of oil, eager to rejoice with those who rejoiced. Miriam walked many miles, scrolls tucked under her arm, lanterns swinging. She invited fishermen along the Sea of Galilee, farmers in Nazareth, traders in Jericho. Some accepted gladly. Others laughed. A few cursed her. She remembered the vineyard owners who had beaten her before and prayed for courage. She never forced the invitation. She offered it with grace, then entrusted hearts to God. Her feet grew calloused, but her heart remained tender. One day, Miriam visited a village beyond Bethany. There she met a man sitting under a fig tree. His eyes were distant, his tunic stained, a rope lay at his feet. She recognized him. It was the man who had been cast out from the feast. He had wandered for days, haunted by his refusal to accept the garment. He looked up as she approached. "You," he whispered, shame thick in his voice. "You invited me before. I did not listen. I held on to my pride. Now I am lost." Miriam sat beside him. "The invitation still stands," she said softly. His eyes widened. "But I was thrown out." "The king's mercy is deep," Miriam replied. "Come, take the garment you refused. Let yourself be clothed in grace." Tears poured down his cheeks. He nodded slowly, hope flickering. Miriam took his hand. Together they rose. He left the rope at the foot of the fig tree and walked with her toward the palace. The road before them lined with olive trees shimmering in the sun. A lantern swung gently between them. It did not matter how many times he had refused before. What mattered was his willingness now. Time passed, and stories of the great wedding feast traveled far beyond Jerusalem. Travelers recounted the tale in marketplaces from Caesarea to Capernaum. They spoke of a king who sent invitations to nobles and merchants only to be rejected. They spoke of servants beaten and killed. They spoke of burning vineyards and of open gates, of poor and lame and blind people seated at the king's table. They spoke of a man without a garment being cast out, of joy overflowing, of lives transformed. The parable became a mirror, reflecting back the hearts of all who heard it. In distant towns, scribes debated the meaning of the wedding garment. Some said it represented good works, others said it symbolized faith. Still others said it was the righteousness of the king's son. Scholars wrote scrolls on the subject, quoting prophets and rabbis. Yet those who had been at the feast knew that no amount of academic debate could substitute for the experience of humility, for the simple act of accepting grace. Children grew up hearing their parents tell the story. They imagined themselves on the road with Miriam, lantern light bouncing off their faces. They imagined pulling silk robes over their shoulders, feeling the weight of acceptance. They imagined dancing with Hannah, singing with the blind musician, weeping with Judah. For them, the parable was not just a lesson, but a picture of hope. It told them there was a place set for them, that they mattered to the king, that they were seen even in their poverty. Hannah lived many more years. She continued to draw water from the well, but now she often sat with women who felt overlooked, listening to their stories, sharing hers. When she died, her burial was attended by people from villages near and far. They spoke of the feast, of how she had reminded them to say yes to grace. Simon learned to make crutches for others, carving wood with skill and love. He would tell each person who came for help about the feast, about the man who provided everything, about the garment of honor. Judah became known not just as a leather worker, but as a man of generosity. He often gave sandals to those who could not pay, saying it was his way of repaying the king. Miriam grew older, her hair silvering like the threads of a fine tapestry. She trained other servants to carry invitations, teaching them to speak with gentleness, to persevere through rejection, to celebrate every acceptance. She told them that the invitation was more than words on a scroll. It was the heart of the king reaching out. When she could no longer walk the roads, she sat by the palace gate, blessing those who returned from their journeys, praying for those still on the road. The king lived to see many more feasts. Each one carried echoes of the first. He continued to invite widely, to open his gates to those who would come. He remembered the first feast when he felt disappointment and joy mixed in equal measure. He remembered the man cast out, the vineyard owners punished. He remembered the laughter of the poor. He often told his son, "The feast taught me how to rule. It taught me that justice and mercy must always hold hands." His son listened and smiled, carrying the lesson in his heart as he prepared to one day take the throne. The parable of the wedding feast outlived the king and his son. It became part of the fabric of the people's faith, a story whispered at night, preached in synagogues, shared around campfires. It crossed oceans and deserts, languages and cultures. It reminded each generation that a banquet is being prepared, that invitations are sent, that responses matter. It warned of the danger of hard hearts and the folly of pride. It promised that those who are least likely to be invited may be seated closest to the king. The parable speaks still. It calls through the busyness of our lives, through our work and obligations, through our fear and shame. It invites us to set aside our excuses, to accept the garment of grace, to find our place at the table. And it whispers, even in the darkest night, that there is a light on a distant hill, a door standing open, a feast ready to begin. As the story comes to rest in our ears and hearts, let us pause and consider its echoes in our own lives. What excuses have we given when grace has whispered our name? Have we been like the merchants and farmers, so consumed with business and busyness that we have missed the invitation to something deeper? Have we, like the vineyard owners, responded with anger to the gentle call of love? Or have we, like the poor on the highways, known our need and accepted the robe of honor with trembling hands? The king's invitation is not about status. It is not about worthiness. humility to receive. It is about knowing that we are poor in spirit, that our hands, though busy, are empty without the bread of life. The robe of honor is not about perfection. It is about allowing ourselves to be clothed in grace. When we cling to our own garments, our achievements, our pride, we are like the man without the wedding clothes, comfortable perhaps for a moment, but unprepared for the light of truth. The parable also speaks to those who have felt unwanted, uninvited. It tells us that the king sees the overlooked, the lame, the blind, the ashamed. It tells us that there is room at the table for those who have been wounded, marginalized, forgotten. If you have ever felt too broken to belong, hear this. The feast is prepared for you. Your name is on the scroll. Do not let fear or shame keep you away. There is a robe waiting, stitched with threads of mercy, dyed with colors of compassion. Slip it over your shoulders and come to the table. Perhaps you have already tasted the feast. If so, let its memory shape your days. Let your work become an offering. Let your home be an open door. Let your table host those who would never be invited elsewhere. Let the grace you received overflow to others. Remember those still standing at the crossroads, uncertain or unaware. Be like Miriam. Carry the lantern of invitation. Speak with kindness. Persist in love. Do not be discouraged by refusals. Continue to offer, knowing that acceptance is a miracle born of humility. Finally, know that the feast is both here and yet to come. We experience glimpses of it when we gather with others in love, when we share meals with strangers, when we forgive and are forgiven, when we are known and still accepted. But there remains a greater banquet ahead, when every tear will be wiped away, when pain and death will be no more. The King who prepared the wedding feast is preparing a place for you, right now, with patience beyond measure. Tonight, as you lay your head on your pillow, let the images of olive groves and lantern light lull you into rest. Let the melody of the blind musician's song drift through your thoughts. Let the taste of bread and wine linger in your memory. Let the warmth of the robe of honor wrap around your heart. And as you breathe deeply, surrender your excuses, your shame, your pride. Whisper yes to the invitation. Allow yourself to be led by lantern light down the road toward home. May peace settle over you like the desert night. May grace beckon you like the soft glow of a palace on a hill. May your dreams be filled with feasts and open doors. And when morning comes, may you carry the memory of the banquet into every moment, inviting others with your kindness, living as one who has been invited, accepted, and transformed. Many are called, few are chosen. Choose tonight to be among the few. Accept the garment. Take your seat. Let the feast of love never end. If this story brought peace to your heart tonight, you can continue your rest with another peaceful biblical story from our playlist. Subscribe and return whenever your soul needs stillness. Together, we can make this place grow into a quiet sanctuary for many restless hearts.